Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today at the DotOrg Expo. My name is Herschel Leiner. I'm the president of H. Leiner Company, and I'll be facilitating the panel discussion today. The name of today's discussion is Authenticity Has No Artificial Ingredients: How Legacy Institutions Are Built and Rejuvenated. At H. Leiner Company, we believe that your organization's relationships with your donor is of the utmost importance. It's as strong as relationships are the bedrock of healthy, robust, and ongoing donor relations. This is based on 4 core pillars. Continuity, credibility, integrity, and symbolism. The concept is known as brand authenticity. The extent by which donors perceive an organization to be faithful towards itself, that's continuity. True to its values and mission statement, that's its credibility. Motivated by caring responsibility, that's its integrity. And finally, able to support donors being true to themselves, symbolism. People, donors, can sense inauthenticity, and it makes them less likely to donate. Today we'll hear from experts in authenticity. We're excited to have such distinguished panelists with us to share their insights, their experience, and wisdom. If I can change the channel for a moment, part 2 of my introduction, there's a very well-known tefillah that we all say, the tefillah of Shema Kolenu. And in the tefillah of Shema Kolenu, we ask, we beseech of Hashem, Al tashlichenu li'ezikna. Don't cast us away li'ezikna to old age, or in times, or the times of old age, kechlos kachen al tazvenu. When our strengths fail, please Hashem, forsake us not. An interesting question is asked, why is the terminology al tashlichenu li'ezikna? Why does it not say al tashlichenu bizikna or lizikna? What's with li'ezikna? So I once heard from a gadol who said the following: we all want to get old. We all want to earn the beauty and the pleasure of getting old. It's what comes with age, the challenges, the changes, the adaptations. That's what we pray for, that Hashem should not give us those extra challenges and changes in need. How appropriate it is in this topic when we're talking about legacy organizations. We cherish and we're in awe of our leaders. We're represented today by organizations that are bedrock of Torah and Chesed and importance, vital to Yiddishkeit and to Torah, and especially to Torah Jews. We need to learn from these legacy organizations, but at the same time we need to understand that with legacy and older, so we say, organizations, we need to adapt. We need to understand how to deal with changing times, changing people, changing economics. Personally, in my 40-plus years working with nonprofits, this is the 5th recession that I'm experiencing. We don't get fazed by recessions because we have Siyata D'Shmaya and know there is a bigger power that runs our world, but we have to deal with it. So I'd like to move on and start the discussion with our prestigious panelists, and I ask each panelist to try to keep their answers as brief as possible, to a minute or less as possible, and I will direct each question to specific panelists. Our first question will be an open question for all 4 panelists. What makes brand name or legacy institutions stand out besides being old? Rabbi Meir May.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Charity.org for putting this together. And I have to acknowledge the Chashuva panelists that I'm sharing this stage with, all of them representing extraordinary mostos, and it's a tremendous cover for me to be among them. The Wiesenthal Center, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, is not a Torah organization. So when they said I should speak on authenticity, so the question is, how am I going to spin this one? And I don't think I have to spin it, because I'm going to explain that when you talk about branding, I don't have a problem with branding, because I represent the legacy of a great and heroic man called Simon Wiesenthal, who I knew quite well. I had the covet of taking him to all of our dinners. He invited me to Vienna to show me all his prizes late in his life. And when you have the responsibility of memory, which is what he bequeathed to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, every day I present my card to a donor or to a politician, to a president or to a king. I carry the legacy of Mr. Wiesenthal and the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. And that is holy, holy, holy work. And it's my obligation to reflect that seriousness and that sanctity of what I do.
Okay. Naftali Miller.
Thank you, Rabbi Leiner. It's a tremendous plus to hear from Rabbi Leiner. When I first started out, I went to a couple of conferences and I heard from Rabbi Leiner, and I followed his work. And if everyone would ever pick up the original Shar Yoshev mailings, you will learn a lot from the back of the book. So it pays to pick up those mailings. I want to start off with a story that I saw over the Shabbos, and I think it stands very strong on this point. Reb Shimon Schwab, Zecher Tzaddik Kadosh L'Bracha, went to the Chavetz Chaim before he left to America. And Reb Chavetz Chaim said to him, "Are you a Kohen?" So he said, "No, I'm not a Kohen." So he said, "It's a shame you're not a Kohen, because I'm a Kohen and I'm going to do the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. When the temple comes, I'm going to serve the Jewish people." He said, "Are you a Levi?" He goes, "No, I'm not a Levi. It's a shame you're not a Levi, because the Leviim are going to be able to serve the Jewish people." And Schwab was baffled by the question. And he asked him, "Rebbe, tell me, what are you trying to tell me?" He said, "The reason why I'm a Kohen is because 3,000 years ago, my father stood up and he said, Mil Hashem Elai." He planted the seed. You're going to go to America. You're not going to see what's going to happen, but you have to plant the seeds, because if you plant it and you stand up, you're going to see the fruition later on. And the reason why I'm going to serve is because my grandfather stood up.
Thank you so much. Chaim Shimon Neuberger.
Each of the four organizations that are being presented today have in their name exactly who they are. Probably the only way to stay true to your authenticity is to have the organization set up where there's a leadership that is the guiding light to what it is that you do. I have a tremendous chus of running Torah Umesorah. Now, Torah Umesorah was started almost 80 years ago in a very different world. But Reb Shraga Feivel Mendelovich started it along with a Vad Rosh Yeshivas. And as the times change and the challenges change, the authenticity does not change, because A, Torah Umesorah, those two words stay the same, and B, the leadership of it comes from the guiding lights of our Torah, who are Rosh Yeshivas. Every one of you in your organization has that ability to set it up where the leadership, whether it's in-house or, as in my circumstance, it's a guiding light from outside, have a clarity as to what it is your mission, and how do you stay authentic to that mission. Simon Wiesenthal Center stands for itself, as was eloquently said. The Agudah, similarly to Torah Umesorah, is guided by a Vada of Rosh Yeshivas. And I can't think of any other organization that says in exactly what it is than Colel Chabad, because that's what they do. They have kolim all across the world. So it's not only in the name, it's in the way it's set up. To stick to its authenticity is the best way to do it, maybe the only way to do it, is to make sure you have that guiding light that keeps you true to your mission.
Thank you so much, Zalman.
So, number one, a big yeshukayach. When it comes to legacy institutions, Colel Chabad was started by the Baal HaTanya in 1788. So I think the legacy, we have some years. But me personally, I'm probably the youngest, so it's befitting for that to go last. But when I first started at Colel Chabad, I sat with the big marketer where I showed them what Colel Chabad does. Colel Chabad is actually not a kollel. We predate the kollel concept. We help poor people in Eretz Yisrael. And it was started by the Alter Rebbe. I showed him our soup kitchens and the hachnosas kala that we do and help for widows and orphans, yisomim, almanas. I showed him all of our projects. And the guy, a donor, set up this meeting with this big guru. And he listened to my whole presentation. He was calm, gentle, nice. Then he looks at me, he says, when it comes to marketing, you face two challenges, your first name and your last name. Because the language moved faster than we did. We still stay true to what we are. The Colel came 150 years after the establishment of Colel Chabad, and what today people identify as Chabad. So we're more forward from actually the oldest of the original institutions that help. And I think notwithstanding the challenge of us not being to that name of Colel Chabad, but our focus is helping the poor people in Eretz Yisrael, it's necessary to stick to that. This is the name that we were given. I think also the most important thing is we have the Rabbeim. We started by the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, and we continue. But there was constantly changes. Over the past 230 years, there was constantly changes. He mentioned, your fifth recession. After the concept of the tzedakah pushka was started by the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, the oldest reference of a tzedakah pushka, of using coins, which actually also brought women into philanthropy. The first time where women were turned to give also money was before Lich Pension, was started by the second Chabad Rebbe. Again, responding to changing times. After the War of 1812, there was the economy in Russia and the region crashed, so it became necessary. So the necessity of staying true, but also always to keep your finger on the pulse, which way the wind's blowing, and you have to change with the time. If not, you're not going to last very long.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. I do want to share one or two personal stories after the question. What traits do the leaders have that make them stand out and the organization thrive? So I can say from personal experience, my 40 years in the nonprofit world, I have two experiences that really told me something about the leaders of these organizations. First was the legendary Rabbi Moshe Shera. As great and as a powerful leader as he was, he always had a connection with the individual in Klal Yisrael. What did he call what was the terminology used? He's Yid, Klal Yisrael Yid. Rabbi Yisrael was the terminology he used. And in my early years as an executive director, I used to call him up and say, I need some time. And he would say, come down to 5 Beekman Street. That goes back a little while. And those days, we weren't interrupted with all the technology we are today. We locked the door, and for 2 or 3 hours, we would talk shop. Talking shop means we would discuss different questions and challenges and insights, strategy. I learned a world from that, and I realized that big, great leaders are also tremendous people. And there's so much that you can learn from them individually, not just as great leaders. And so too the same with Chaim Shimon's grandfather, Naftali Neuberger, Herman Neuberger. I will never forget the time I had a very serious question with a donor with potential of $25 million. It was 2 o'clock. These were the old days when we were next to JFK, when you could buy a ticket without your name on it, and you could actually go from the ticket counter to the plane, no security, no checks, no names. Remember those days? And he said, come on down. 2 o'clock, at 2:30 I was on a plane. 3:30 I landed in Baltimore. The experience of having Rabbi Neuberger drive me was something I will never forget. He brought me to the office, locked the door. We had a discussion strategically how to deal with it. But that was not the end. Not only did he take me back to the airport, he stopped at the deli and he said, you can't go back without dinner. He made sure that I was taken care of. This was a man that literally had his pulse on everything going on, not just in the country, but in the world. Great leaders are great people. But I would like to ask some of the panelists to share with us, Rabbi Naftali Miller first, what makes great leaders stand out and thrive?
I think the first people that stand out to me, walking into the room and seeing all these people that are here for Klal Yisrael. I think you all deserve a tremendous round of applause for standing up every single day for your maisid and your concern. I said, this is what a great leader is. I think another story is in place, and I love stories, and I hope everybody else does also. I met Diane Dunner 2 weeks ago in California by the H3 Summit. And we were talking, and he says, I want to tell you a story about Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe was the leader, Gadol. He was, in his time, he went to Eretz Yisrael for the great Kasiyah Gedolah. And they say Rabbi Eliyah Lapian came special to make the blessing on him because he was a great person. Rav Moshe was davening mincha. And he did not go down to do tachlan because there was no Sefer Torah in the room. And Diane Donner said, he was a young man at that time, not more than 18 years old. And he walked up to Rav Moshe Feinstein, and he said, Rosh Hashiva, in Eretz Yisrael, you do tachnan, even if this is not a Sefer Torah in the room. He said in a second, Rav Moshe put his hand down and said tachnan. A great leader is somebody that's willing to accept and willing to listen, no matter who the person is. It could be the shoemaker, it could be the person at the door. Ultimately, if somebody's going to listen, they're going to be protected, they're going to get the advice. There's so many times where I have heard from secretaries, I've heard from receptionists, advice, guidance, how to get to people. If you're listening and you're willing to listen and you want to hear, you'll ultimately protect you and help you accomplish what you're doing for the organization.
Chaim, Shimon.
Two things. First of all, an apology that I didn't do my homework before I sat down on such a chashva panel. Didn't know what Colel Chabad was doing. So I apologize, Rabbi, that I misspoke. Secondly, I would have to point out that the two biggest chidushim about your two stories were the fact that they locked the door. I don't think that that's something that's done anymore nowadays. The chinuch I received from my legendary grandfather and my father's Zichron Livracha is, I guess, the most apropos way of putting it to each and every one of us. If we understand that the talents and the opportunities that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives us is an achrayus on us to use appropriately, then I really don't know that much whether it's such a chiddush to be an appropriate leader. The reason why Rav Moshe was able to be makabel from a young Dayan Donner, of whether he was being makabel halacha or not, was because I'm here to be an Oved Hashem. And if it's making this 18-year-old feel special because he came over and told me something, so I'll go and do it. Whether it's la halacha or not la halacha, it's far more important. But each and every one of you, and all of us, have been endowed with tremendous koiches, and then given the opportunity to serve in a leadership role. Just remind yourself every day that schus And that opportunity comes with an achrayus to do it right, to treat people like a mensch, to think in the way that you're supposed to think, take guidance from where you're supposed to take guidance. And it's not really rocket science. It just means realizing that that's where the Yetzer Hara is going to fight you. Because if he can get you not to be a proactive, proper leader, then chances are your organization is not going to reach the level that it's supposed to reach. Just live with that. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Be encouraged by it. Ashrecha that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave you these kaiches, and ashrecha that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave you this opportunity, and ashrecha that you have that achrayus.
Thank you. How do legacy organizations adapt to the changing times? Yeah. We feel free to add, if you can make it short.
I want to say I don't lock doors because I meet with women in my office, and I have a rule. When they come in, I close the door and I say to them, that door is not locked, and my executive assistant will come in regularly as a matter of course, spontaneously. And unfortunately, I don't lock doors with men either. We live in a world where my reputation is too important to me and to the work that I have to do to be on the wrong side of an accusation where I have to disprove a negative. Just
So what happens in the open doors?
anybody can come in. It's my office, you can come in anytime. Whoever wants to see me comes in. Whoever needs to see me sees me. Anyone who wants to talk to me after these sessions can also see me anytime or write me, Rabbi May at Wiesenthal.com. So leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of the people in your charge. And if you want to write something down, that's what I would write down. And this applies to everyone on all levels here in this room. There are people from bigger institutions and smaller institutions, and sometimes we get caught up with our responsibilities as CEO, the big titles get in our way. People ask me all the time for employment at the Wiesenthal Center. The first question they ask me is their title. I know it's not the right guy for me or woman for me. So we have to know that leadership has a responsibility and a dual responsibility to take care of the person who works with you, not for you, the person who works with you, no matter what rank they have. And as a leader, you have an obligation, a moral obligation, to bring out the best that that employee can have. You have to give that employee every opportunity. You can't compete with your employee. It's not a unilateral obligation, but it's a bilateral obligation. I also want to say that you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. The Wiesenthal Center is going through a transition now. We have a new CEO who's not a Ben Torah. And as a result, I came to some meetings, and the language from the entertainment world where he came from was not acceptable to me. I don't listen to it. I don't use those words. And I don't want to sit in a room at a high level and hear words that are inappropriate. Meaning, we are refined people. We are mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh. And anytime we want to be impressive or impactful on anybody is when we carry that label and that imperative with us all the time, that I am a Ben Torah. Even at the Wiesenthal Center, I'm a Ben Torah. I don't have to be machanech. I asked Rav Aaron Lapiansky whether I should leave the Wiesenthal Center over the language. And he told me the Wiesenthal Center is not a kiruv organization, not a yeshiva, so I don't have to be so makbid on that. But for myself, I have to say, I confronted the CEO, and I have to say he's been very quiet on that note. We have to act the part, because everyone knows that people give to people. And if you're not someone who people can respect, if you haven't developed the statesmanship needed to be effective, you will not be effective, no matter what the title, no matter what the organization.
Zalman, if I could ask you to stick to the question of legacy organizations, adapt to the changing times.
Okay. So number one, I just want to say, as a fundraiser with Open Door Closer, I want to be in somebody else's office. I don't want anyone in my office. If I'm in my office, I'm wasting time. I'm in somebody else's office. but about the changing organizations. It's something that happens especially in any intergenerational company. We're not unique. The world is changing. Earlier, we had they were discussing about AI. Say those words to my father, he won't know what you're talking about. We use AI all the time. Danny Gavin was here, he spoke very well. He's very forward-thinking. There's actually tools in the modern world that also help with that too. Besides, computer programs, I know there's somebody from EOS speaking later. There's actually tools out there that Chachma v'Goyim Tamin, the Goyim came up with Chachma of how to also intergenerational conversations. It's just same thing as in companies, same thing in every moisid. And it's something that the younger people in institutions have to take serious. And you have to take serious that there is certain things that you have to gain the trust of the leadership, that you're going to move forward with things that they don't know what the TikTok is, again, every moisid to where their reach is. And they're going to have to understand that there's something that, but there's tools for that. And I think that turning to the public sector, turning to companies for such things is not a bad thing. It's actually a very positive thing.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Was the question changing with times in using tools, or the question was changing with times in what our authentic goals are?
Right. Okay, so the question was not the tools. We'll get to that question.
Right.
The question is, how do legacy organizations adapt to changing times? Which will lead me to the next question. Does part of adapting mean re-examining the organization's mission, its vision, its leadership, something else? If yes, how would you do it? I'm going to please ask all the panelists to be brief because we have a lot more questions to ask, and I think that the audience would like to hear the answers. So I'm going to begin with Naftali.
So I'll try to keep it brief. 3 months ago, I got Bell's palsy. I made a decision then. It was very hard for me to get out and go out and talk to people and start meeting. Most of our day, like you mentioned, is going out to meet people. So a person has to decide, once they have the challenge, how do you deal with it? Legacy organizations have integrity, have pieces that stand up over time. A person has to position those things and own those challenges for your benefit. So Agudah Yisrael is a legacy organization, like was mentioned. Sometimes people say, what does it do? What doesn't it do? We get that all the time. I saw a need. I saw a need in the special needs world. Most of the stuff we were doing already. We just repackaged a product that we had, and we called it Yalom. It's a special needs center, resource center for special needs children. Together, Baruch Hashem, over the past 3 years, we opened up 7 offices across the country, fielded thousands of calls. Today, it's a household name. Every single organization doesn't have to change their mission. Take the pieces that they do and make them better. Take the pieces that you're doing already and just make it more relatable to people.
Thank you. Thanks, Shimon.
So I'm going to give 2 parts to this answer. One is to start off with, I was asked a question specifically about my organization, the organization I'm Zeichet to run. But there's a way of translating it into any organization that's here at this expo. Chinuch is a mitzvah in the Torah that we all have, and it's interesting. This is something that the Yeshiva Zechron Levrach of Rutherford used to talk about, is that there's a Messiah on how to do every single mitzvah in the Torah. Yet there's no Messiah on Chinuch. And that's because Chinuch has to be tailor-made to Chanech L'Nar Al Pi Darkai. Every single child has to be mechunech in their own special way. So it automatically does not have a Messiah to it, which might cause a problem for the title of my organization. But the Messiah we do have is that the organization Torah Umesorah is guided by the Vad Rosh Yeshivas, and over the 80 years, it has changed tremendously from its original stated goal to what it's doing today. And that is done with the guided lights of those that were in the position of leadership in-house and the leadership that was in the Vad Rosh Yeshivas. But in every single one of your organizations, and I'll translate that into each and every one of your lives, you know, at a similar conference, Rabbi Leo Stern stood up and posed the following question. If your organization closed down and every single member of the staff got their dream job, would it be a disaster? That's the way he put it. And if you can't come up with the answer to that question, don't worry about it, because your organization is going to close. So having a clarity of mission and that mission necessary for your constituents, so then it changes all by itself through the times. And if Taka, your mission is no longer necessary, it won't continue. Your organization won't continue. Hopefully each of you will end up with the dream job you're looking for somewhere else. So make sure that you have the leadership in place to have the clarity of the answer to that question. What is it that your organization is supposed to be doing? Own it and do it.
I'd like to go to a little different direction from this question, because we're all talking from a standpoint of examining the organization's mission and leadership. I find from working, I've worked, Baruch Hashem, with over 500 nonprofits, and I've noticed that I'm going to use some unpleasant, not words that you would be uncomfortable with, but some unpleasant words in the nonprofit world. That's called assessment and evaluations. Many organizations start with a certain structure. It's usually one person who's doing everything. And organizations, like business, change. And as they change, the ability to adapt and understand that good leaders and good organizations know how to let go, hire right people, step back, take evaluation and assessment, and analyze their organizations and make sure the right people are in the right place. I've done this exercise more than once, where I've asked people to list the jobs that they do for the organization, and so many times they've put a list of 15 to 20 different jobs that they do. Then I said, let's put that to the side. Now put a list as what's the most important jobs for this organization. As executive director, let us say. And they would put another punch list of 10 or 15 points. And I said, let's match the two. And most commonly, as we all know in the world of fundraising, I don't care how much you enjoy fundraising, nobody likes to get rejected. And many times, the last thing a person will do will pick up the phone and try to make that appointment. Because until you make that appointment, you pick up the phone, you haven't been rejected. So in organization life, the ability to step back and understand what your role is and your changing role and your organization's role is so fundamental. I remember in a yeshiva that I was involved with, we were hiring a new Rebbe for a special program. And I asked the Rebbe, the Rosh Yeshiva and the Menal called me into the office to be part of the meeting of the hiring. So I asked the Rebbe, can you give me a one-page job description of what your job is and what your goal is? And he looked to me and he said, this is a yeshiva. That's not how we operate. So I said, if I'm here for a purpose, with the Rosh Yeshiva Menal, I'd like to request that. So he did. He came back with a one-page document. This Rosh Yeshiva today has told me it's been the guiding light. Why? Because he documented his goal for the year, and he doubled his goal. is when you put a goal down on paper and you step back and you reevaluate yourself, you see that either you've been too kind to yourself or you didn't judge your ability. So re-examining your organization is very fundamental, and I think it's very critical for all healthy growing organizations. So successful organizations need to be ahead when it comes to technology. How do you recommend organizations deal with them? I ask now, as time is running, that we please keep it down to a minute or less. And Naftali, how is Agudah deal with technology today? I'm sure it's a sensitive issue.
Yeah, just going really quick back to the previous question. Right, Leiner came out with a campaign for Tervadas, 100 years young. I see Rejuvenated there, and it was so powerful because they acknowledged 100 years, but also made it young. I think, using technology, we have to evolve, and with the guidelines that work with your organization. But it's important, we started with WhatsApps and all the, TikTok, we're not there yet, and I don't think we'll ever get there. But I think it's important that a person has a clear principle and clear guidelines how you do things, and people will respect it. I think that's what I have found.
This is your question, I'm sorry.
What, technology?
Yes. How do you use them if you can keep them?
Technology is everything. That's how you track your donors. That's how you follow them. That's how you do the accounting of your office. I assume, I spoke about this at one of the president's conference at Torah Umesorah about the ethics of running our businesses. Of course, it was hard for me as not a yeshiva to be representing this concept of emes and Erlichkeit to the yeshivas and represent the Simon Wiesenthal Center, but it does make a big difference. We have to make sure that all of our systems are in place, that we're following all the rules. And then, of course, there's the donor technology to track the donors, what they gave, how much, when they're due for asking, when they're due to give more. It's a whole nother subject, can't answer it in 5 seconds.
Okay, we're going to move on. How has development changed in the last few decades, and what pointers would you give to people in the field? So I'd like to ask this question to Rav Zalman.
Again, repeat the question.
Sure. How has development changed in the last few decades? What pointers would you give to people in the field?
The last few decades, the core of fundraising, the core of development hasn't changed much. It's asking a person for money. The means of doing it has changed significantly. And the first thing is, I would say, is it's a hard thing to tell a leader of an organization, is you have to trust people that know better than you when it comes to using the available tools out there. But the core aspect of it, I'll just share a funny story that when my great uncle went on shlichus from the Rebbe to Australia, he went to my great grandmother to discuss. He says, you're going to come to a person, you're going to knock on his door, you can ask him for money, he's going to say no. You should know it's not the Yid that's talking, it's his Yetzer Hara. You'll go to him a second time, you'll ask him for money, and he'll say no. You should know it's not the Yid that's talking, it's his Yetzer Hara. The third time, you're going to be scared to ask him. You should know that his Yetzer Hara went into you. So that didn't change. The only difference is if it's a telephone or if it's a WhatsApp, and each person according to how they want to be reached.
So let me share, thank you for your response. Let me share with you some insights that I was thinking about in this question. First of all, I think there's an unbelievable transfer of generational wealth that's going on. I'm sure you're seeing this, Rabbi May, on a tremendous level. What happens is in many organizations, especially when you get comfortable, you spend a lot of time with some of your lead donors and you forget that that wealth will be transferred to the next generation, whether it's to siblings, spouses, or whoever it may be. And I've seen this, and I've even done this mistake often myself until I learned and realized. You start early in building the relationship with the family, the entire component. Make sure everyone's on board. Don't be over-focused by the president of the company necessarily when you see his kids are in the company. Realize that the company will have continuity. It will live beyond, and many times the younger generation does not have the same interests and the same priorities. The earlier you have them buy in, the better off you are. The second part is to understand the younger generation. Now, who am I to talk about it? I'm a proud father of a young generation. I consider myself young and my children young, but I've learned a lot from my children as well, as they're all in the business. One is sitting here to the left, doing the audio video. The other one's my daughter, Colel Chabad, sitting here. I've learned a lot from them in their involvement in the nonprofit of understanding the next generation. I'll give you one example that I experienced in fundraising, which was a game changer. I was sitting with a client about building a certain building out on the West Coast. And we were talking about what the ask should be for this donor. And the discussion went from the $50,000 to $100,000 range, and we gave the reasons why that would make sense. Sitting in the room was a member of the committee, which was a young fellow, he's 30 years old. He turns to me and says, Rabbi Leiner, you're off the track. So I said, explain to me, I want to learn. He says, let me tell you something about your generation and something about my generation. Your generation was brought up to cherish, respect money, understand the value, savings, rainy day funds, invest money, diversification, all the beautiful fundamentals of finance and money. My generation, we make $100,000 today, we buy a $120,000 car tomorrow. We make clothes a good deal, we blow $5 to $10 grand on a dinner out. Money is a means for us to be able to do something that someone else can't. You should, telling the rabbi, be going to this donor and asking him for $1 million. We looked at each other, $1 million, that's a lot of money. Try it. So, I prepped the rabbi for what we were going to do. Next day he has a meeting with his donor and said, we'd like you to consider $1 million gift. Caveat, $100,000 a year for 10 years. I'm in. And that $50,000 donor turned into $1 million donor. Why? Because what he just did was he stood alone from his friends. He did something that they maybe could do but wouldn't do, but now he did. So he became a leader, but also as a young generational donor, he became someone that knew how to stand alone. I thought it was a very important lesson. Let's talk about communication and the importance.
I just want to add, the younger generation wants accountability. They want to see what you're doing with money. The older Holocaust generation, they just gave money because it was the right thing to do. They wanted to rebuild Torah Umesorah. Younger people today want to know what the money is going to be used for. It has to go to a specific project. They have to see the value of the project. Not only evaluating ourselves, the experts, but we're also evaluating the programs. They want to see the evals. They want to see how much impact the program actually had, not what you sold it that way. I just wanted to add that.
So let's talk about communication and its importance. Are there any tricks of the trade or recommendations that you can share? I asked this question to Rabbi Chaim. Shimon Neuberger, please.
This is communication, just to clarify the question, this is communication with my staff, with our constituents, with both?
External.
External communication.
Yes.
So it really pulls together the last two questions all into one, because using technology and how has fundraising changed over the years, and if you're doing external communication, if you're talking about how you externally communicate with either your constituents or your donors, you really have to analyze those two pieces and communicate with them in the way that they want to be communicated with, in the style that they will be communicated. You could send out the most beautiful brochures and the most beautiful mailings, but if the people that you're trying to attract their attention have stopped looking at their mail, and their mailbox is picked up once a week by their maid to throw into the garbage because they don't look at mail anymore, and everything is in email form or in something like that, then you're just not communicating. So I'm not saying that snail mail is done and over with, because there are probably some in this crowd that are going to tell me that they're highly successful with snail mail. So it's about, the communication is about understanding your constituency and understanding what technology or what line of communication they want to be communicated by.
Let me give you, thank you. Some short tips that I was thinking about this question too, even though no one asked it to me. Some short tips, which I found, again, working with so many organizations, the power of a thank you is most probably the most powerful part of a fundraiser's tool. It's the two-letter word that's most probably the magic of fundraising. Spending a day, could you imagine a donor getting a phone call and you could actually even leave a voice message and saying, I'm calling just to thank you. I'm calling to let you know the impact of your gift. No solicitation, just want to thank you for what you've done. Communication today, no one has patience. I think they say the most effective means of communication today. What would you say the most effective communication is today? Believe it or not. It's, anyone? Phone call? Text. Practically every text is read. WhatsApp, look at any person who does WhatsApp. They have hundreds of WhatsApps. I'm backed up with 120 WhatsApps for all nonsense in the world. Text, for some reason, everyone is reading the text. It's in front of you, and that's most likely from someone that's doing something personal, mostly to you. That's one way. The other way is I like to call the State of the Union or the State of the Organization. Segment your organization. Take your top donors, your top tier donors, and send them a State of the Union, a State of the Organization. Accomplishments, investment. We've invested, whether it's a school or organization, how large or small you are, this is what your investment returned. This is the new programs we introduced. These are the amount, this is the grade or the rate, the graph of our growth, whether it's in marks and scholastic, whether it's in income, whether it's in growth, whether in demographics. They're interested in data. Data is very important to them. And lastly, a story. As we heard from Mendel, who's the master of branding, a good story is is more impactful. I always like to say that we know the famous saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words. I always like to say a good picture's worth $1 million. Picture stands for itself. Don't cloud your pictures with many. One good picture talks or tells the story of your entire organization. Let's move on to the next question. Yes, Rabbi.
Can I answer on this one?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to add, one of the new ways fundraising has changed is that there are women donors. Just want to add that because you'll see that there are many women donors. And we make a mistake if we think they're only going to go to the men. Number one. Number two, when we talk about communication.
We have more women donors than men.
There you go.
Colel Chabad has more women donors than men.
There you go. So, and the mission speaks to women too, especially. So but the point is taken. My point's taken. But I would like to say something else. You know, we talk about thank you. In an aging population of wealthy Holocaust survivors, there are almanas that are left over. We have to call them before Yontif. The fact that he gave you the money doesn't mean that now that he's gone, that you can forget about him. It's very, very critical to your statesmanship. You're creating yourself as a statesman by taking care of the people that helped you on the way up, because you'll see them later when they're down. I will tell you one story, and this is worth the story. There was one man who became the richest guy in LA, richest billionaire. He gave us $40 million. And when he was asked by his Reform rabbi why he gave Rabbi May $40 million, he said, because you know that I had a big fight with my previous partner and nobody would talk to me. And for 5 years, Rabbi May took me to lunch every 4 months. And that's how you get from 5 million to 40 million. And so that's called communication at the highest level.
I do want to comment on that. So with the reshus of charity, this is something, a sensitive issue, but I do want to say that while we have all these charity campaigns and they're a necessary part of our organizational structure for fundraising, I do want to say that there's one thing that we need to take away, I think, from this session, and if you want to really operate as an organization that really has a vision for the future, organizations' success is dependent on people. In this world of social media, in this world of all this online giving, we forget something. When you finish a program, you finish a campaign, charity campaign, sometimes we count the donations and we count the donors. But the question is, what do we do with it? Do we reopen the campaign next year, 10 months later? Or do we spend time in one of the most fundamental parts of a good nonprofit is analytics. What do you do with the data? It's easier to spend time in profiling and analyzing your donors and realizing there's patterns, there's demographics, there's very sophisticated logistics and technology today that I'm not talking about just AI, that's wonderful, but in our world, and especially in our Torah world, we're talking about people. I'm not talking about masses. There are patterns of the way people give. We've just done a review in my company. We just reviewed an organization that has 36,000 donors and raised $160 million. And we found patterns of people that were eye-opening. We found 500 cities of 3 donors combined gave $10,000. That information could go to sleep easily when you're dealing with 36,000 donors. If you step back and use analytics to understand your donors are people, they're telling you something. A donor from somewhere, nowhere in America, is giving you $2,500 for 3 years in a row. I see he's standing on the table waving his hands saying, notice me. And he could so easily be not noticed. So there's a lot of opportunity today as far as analytics is concerned, and I recommend and advise everyone to really use that tool of analytics, but on a personal level, not for mass information, but for personal information to understand that our organization is about donors and donations. So I think that if we're going to close today, I want to close with one Yiddish Wort, as they say, and this will be the final statement, and then we'll close the session. We all know the famous statement, the famous pasuk from Mishlei, Chanoich Lanar al pi darkai. That's the iconic pasuk of chinuch. Everyone uses it in every place that every good Torah institution has used that as their theme song to some way or another. I heard a beautiful insight from the Zalman Rebbe. He said that Chanoich Lanar al pi darkai, you can look at this pasuk and say, Chanoich ledor al pi darkai. If you want to be and do successful chinuch, you need to understand. Right away he says, obviously we never change Umesorah. As we all know, that's our guiding light. But we need to understand our children, we need to understand our generation, and as nonprofits, we also need to understand our donors. We have to be Chanoich ledor al pi darkai. I say as a fundraiser, the educators in charge of being mechanech the kids, fundraisers, our job is to be mechanech the donors. Thank you.
Round of applause. Thank you very much. Rabbi Herschel Leiner, Rabbi Naftali Miller, Rabbi Meir May, Rabbi Zalman Duchman, Rabbi Chaim Shimon Neuberger. Thank you so much for an insightful session. Please stick around. I would like to